Hello, Intro to Native American Languages. This is Amy, and I am back with Module 2 Lecture Part 2 Language Isolates. If you haven't already, check out the video about language families. So, what is a language isolate? A language isolate is a natural language, and what this means is not constructed or an artificial language like the Klingon language in Star Trek. So it is a natural language that has no genetically related languages. It's all alone in the world. It is an isolate. It is isolated. Language isolates are the only language in a language family because they have no relatives. So they are both their own language family and an individual language. So, what isolates really are, they are the only surviving member of a larger language family that has died out. So, what could that mean? That could mean maybe other groups of people that spoke this language either died, started using a different language, were absorbed into other communities and started using a different language or a kind of hybrid language. And this group, the isolate group, is the only group left out of that larger language family. If a genetic relation to another language is proven at a later date, the language is no longer considered an isolate. This happened with a lot of the languages in North America. It was hard to see at first how certain languages were related to others, so they were grouped as isolates on their own. And then later, when linguists could prove that there were relationships, they were reclassified as members of a different language family. So sign languages, ASL or plain sign language, Creole. These are mixture languages like the Haitian Creole, and constructed languages, those artificial languages, Klingon, Navi, Esperanto, have no related languages and no ancestral proto-language they descend from, but they are not true language isolates because they are not natural languages. So here is a list of some language isolates found in North America. I put the name of the language, where it is found, and then its status. And so if you look at the status, it says either moribund, endangered, sleeping, vulnerable for the different statuses. So on a continuum of in a very good place to a very bad place, a very good place would be healthy. Somewhere in the middle would be continuing. And then as you get towards the bad side, you would have vulnerable, endangered, moribund, and sleeping. So vulnerable means that the language is just that. It's vulnerable to becoming endangered. Endangered means just that there are fewer people speaking the language every generation. And so it is in danger of dying out. Moribund means that there are so few first language speakers that there is no hope except for the language will eventually die out if it stays on the current course. And then sleeping is a language that no longer has any first language speakers. And so as you can see, the status of language isolates and of all North American languages, Native American languages, is not great. So an example of one of the language isolates from the other page, if you notice towards the bottom, we have Yuchi. It's spelled 2 ways with a Y or the EU. And this is a language found in Oklahoma. It is a moribund language. It's originally from the southeastern part of the United States. A lot of people might mistakenly think that Yuchi is related to the Muskogean languages like Choctaw, Chickasaw, especially Creek. Geographically, the Yuchi people were always very close to the Creek and had strong relationships and ties with them even before contact, and even stronger after contact. But their language is not a member of the Muskogean language family. It is a unique and distinct language that is part of some other language family that has since died out. So they're originally from present day Tennessee, migrated to northern Georgia and South Carolina. Some Yuchi people also moved to the Florida Panhandle. They were mound builders, so they had a lot of cultural ties to the Muskogean people. They were removed in the 1830s. Today they're primarily in northeastern Oklahoma. The Yuchi are not a federally recognized tribe, so they don't receive a lot of funding and other things that other tribes receive to work on their language, but they have been absorbed into, in many ways, the Muskogee Creek Nation. And as it says, a lot are citizens, and these are longtime allyships. And then others might be enrolled with the absentee Shawnee or the Cherokee Nation. Again, these regional partnerships and allyships. Yuchi is a language isolate, so we cannot show that it's related to any other known languages. It has been theorized that there's a distant relationship between the Siouan languages, and this has been explored by a number of researchers, but no one has come up with concrete proof yet to show that these languages are related. Yuchi has had a lot of contact with Muskogean languages based on their geography, so there's been borrowing. Certain words from Muskogean languages, especially Creek, have worked their way into Yuchi as a result of them being neighbors and having a lot of contact. The Yuchi call themselves the people of the sun, and there are Yuchi language classes taught in Sapulpa, Oklahoma at the Yuchi House. And if you click on this purple link here, you can find out more about the Yuchi House. There's been quite a few academic works on the Yuchi language, and so here are some citations of different linguistic papers talking about the Yuchi language, its grammar, its vocabulary, and how it works. There's also been people who have recorded stories, traditional Yuchi stories. Here are some language resources for the Yuchi language. So if you click on these links, you'll be brought to the Yuchi Language Project, which the Yuchi House is part of the Yuchi Language Project. You can see in the catalog of endangered languages its status. There is a Yuchi language program through the Muskogee Creek Nation. There is a language primer, which is like a basic textbook. There are some examples of Yuchi that you can hear, and their writing system is very unique because they have some sounds that are difficult in spelling to differentiate, especially English. We all know is the worst about spelling, how vowels can have different sounds depending on the word. So they've come up with a system to highlight those unique sounds to make sure that people are pronouncing them correctly. And it's very interesting looking when you see it. Okay, so in 1999, Yuchi was cited as having 12 fluent speakers, and these were all elders. I know for a fact several of these elders have passed away in the years since, and so I don't know the exact number today. Several word lists were created in the 1800s, and other linguists recorded data through the 1900s. So there's quite a bit written about Yuchi that Yuchi tribal members and heritage speakers can use to pull language information for teaching. The exact sound system has been debated, and so even though a lot of linguists have written about Yuchi, they don't all agree on some of the details of the language. In 1933, a linguist named Wagner wrote the most complete description of Yuchi morphology, so how its words are put together. So how do you make a word in Yuchi? What are the parts of words in Yuchi? And syntax, how do you put those words together to make sentences? So Yuchi uses an animate-inanimate noun system. So what does this mean? Different languages classify nouns in different ways. For example, if you've ever studied Spanish or French, you know that in Romance languages, languages that are descended from Latin, they use a gender system. Something is masculine or something is feminine. And you put all the nouns in these categories, and how you make them plural and how you have adjectives agree with them depends on if it's a masculine or a feminine noun. Well, in Yuchi, they also have a two system to classify, but instead of basing it on gender, it's based on whether the noun is alive or not alive. And alive doesn't have to mean breathing, it could mean moving. For example, in some languages, the sun and the moon are animate. Not because they are necessarily alive, but because they move. In other languages, some things are animate that come from living animals. For example, hair. So in Yuchi, they have this animate inanimate system instead of a masculine and feminine system. And then inanimate nouns can be classified even further by their shape or the position. So is it a long thing? Is it a small thing? Is it a big, bulky thing? Is it laying down? Is it standing up? Is it sitting? And so it's a pretty complicated system. And then animates can also be classified even into smaller groups. And it has this in-group, out-group distinction. So is it male? Is it female? Is it related to me? Is it not related to me? Is it Yuchi? Is it not Yuchi? And so this is a really complex system for nouns. And this is all part of the morphology of the Yuchi language, how nouns are classified, how words are put together. It also has to tie back into the subfield of semantics because we're talking about meaning here. So in Yuchi, verbs are a little bit simpler. They have simple roots. You can make compound verbs, and then you can make derived forms. So we talked about in the very first module lecture, we talked about derived morphology, derivational morphology, and inflectional morphology. So here's the derived form where it has rains is the verb, you add a suffix, and it turns just rains into it rains. Yuchi language also uses pronominal prefixes added to verbs. So what does this mean? So in English, we can add prefixes to nouns or adjectives. In Yuchi, they have prefixes that show who the actor is on the verb. And so it is a pronominal, so it's like a pronoun prefix. And so these can show the inclusive group, the exclusive group, so in or out. They are Yuchi, they are not Yuchi. They are part of our clan, they are not part of our clan. And then they also have tense suffixes, and we have that in English as well, like ing and ed that go on to the end of the verb to tell us if something is happening now or if it happened in the past. But they have some different tenses in Yuchi than we have. They have the near future tense, so something that's about to happen, and the distant future tense, something that is going to happen later. So that is the end of Module 2, Lecture 2 about language isolates. I'll see you again for the lecture about creoles, pidgins, and mixed languages.